Herman Kimmer here. Day 5 of 11 Days of Rembrance. I thank each of the veterans who fought World War I and World War II so I could be free and I could do these videos. Alright, let's get to the next chapter, shall we? The Island Fortress, the Battle of Britten and the Blitz. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. Though Churchill and the election and relief and the escape at Dunkirk, but through the British we by this time able to break some of the German Enigma codes, and knew that no imminent invasion was planned. Their ability to withstand one in the future looked slight. During the Battle of France, among as many British planes had been lost as had rolled off the production lines, much of the army, artillery, and armor had been left behind on the beaches at Dunkirk. Desperate measures had to be taken. A general compression was ordered, and by the beginning of October, 1.7 million battalions had joined the armed forces. A home guard was formed because of the weapons shortage. They had to be armed with props from their companions, even with Napoleonic spikes taken from Admiral Nelson's 150-year-old wooden flagship, Victory, and Portsmouth Harbor. At the same time, high-ranking officials put out via Swedish diplomats to see if some kind of agreement could be reached to end the war. It is as though that the former Prime Minister David Lloyd George and former King Edward IV, now Duke of Windsor, might have been pressured to lead a defense defeated Britain. It also possible that certain British pleasure Hitler, but Churchill was adamant that Britain should stand firm and return to consider the idea. In speech made the Reichstag on 19th of July, Hitler warned Britain of unending suffering and mercenary if they rejected his peace terms. Churchill gave Halifax one of the artifacts of pushing the job of spreading the officer on the radio. A few days later, Operation Sea Lion, the proposed invasion of Britain, was fixed for 15th September. German chiefs of staff were worried about the invasion plans. The German Navy was inadequate to the task, and the crossing the Channel might only be possible after the Luftwaffe had gained air superiority over Britain. George threatened to bring the boat a matter of weeks, and on 13th August the so-called Battle of Britten began. The first day was to set the pattern for the succeeding months. Wave upon wave of the Luftwaffe bombers, escorted by fighters, overflew British airfields, ports, and other tactical targets, sustaining losses in a ratio of roughly 2 to 1. Although they were heavily outnumbered, the British had several clear advantages. They were operating over home territory, so the Spitfires and Hurricanes could attack, land, refuel, and fly up to off the German bombers. They had a new Minister for Aircraft Production, the Press Baron Lord Berwick, appointed by Churchill in May, who managed to outperform the German factories, and they had a simple, clear objective: the destruction of as many German bombers as possible, while grudging charge the objectives on numerous occasions during the morale of German pilots. The morale of the RAF, on the other hand, strengthened as the battle progressed. "Never in the field of human conflict," said Churchill in tribute to airmen, as "so much had been vowed by so many to so few." Even so, the British suffered from a serious shortage of trained pilots. Those that survived found themselves under increasing strain and fighting alongside new recruits with less and less experience, and they had no means of considering the effects German attacks on their fighter aircraft in Kent. Then, by one of the stress of war, the attacks were suddenly called off. A German bomber lost on his way home on 24th August accidentally bombed London, and Churchill responded with a series of small raids on Berlin. Hitler was outraged, having promised that no such thing was possible, and switched his attack to the Indies, increment bombing of British cities a strategy which both sides then adopted for the rest of the war. The British airfields were saved by the end of the battle in October. The Germans had lost 1,733 aircraft to the British 915. In the same month, Hitler proposed that invasion of Britain for the winter. The mass bombings of British cities, the so-called Blitz, destroying 3.5 million homes and killed 30,000 people. Convoy was, in December, destroyed 8 of London's historic Warren churches and forced firefighters to blow up buildings to create fire bricks, something not done since the Great Fire of 1666. Soon British civilians bomb disposal groups were having to defuse up to 4,000 unexploded bombs a month. "I feel we are fighting for life and survival from day to day, hour to hour," said Churchill in Parliament, "but these terror tactics, far from destroying the moral fibre of the British population, only seem to refer that will to endure." It was a lesson adroitly lost on British Bomber Command, which was decided to pursue a policy of terror bombing on Germany until the final weeks of the war. By June 1941, the German air attack on Britain had become more half-hearted as Jordan switched his attention to preparing for war in the East. Meanwhile, a bitter personnel battle in the British Air Ministry between Hugh Dudley and Kent Park, the two men responsible for winning the Battle of Britain, resulted in the removal from command. British island status allowed it to hold out against the German invasions, but only because the sea lanes to America were kept open. Just for vital food and supplies. Hitler realized this, and as far back as September 1939, the U-boats had been ordered to sink as much tonnage as possible to starve Britain into submission. The so-called Battle of the Atlantic had begun with the sinking of the British liner Athena on 4th September 1939 and the dropping of magnetic mines around the coast of Britain. But after the fall of Western Europe, the naval war assumed a new intensity that the French Atlantic ports suddenly became available to the Germans, and Italy's 118 submarines moved the Mediterranean. At the same time, badly needed the ships were taken off Atlantic escort duty, desperate for suggestion from the British Admiral Sir Charles Forbes and sent to the southern England to finish the expedited invasion. In July 1940 alone, nearly 500,000 tons of shipping were sunk in the Atlantic. The German codebreakers had taught themselves to read British naval signals, so they knew many of the convoy sailing routes. Plans. The U-boat's commander, Carl Dixon, was able to direct his submarines with near accuracy. He would out the British would be forced to surrender if he could sink 750,000 tons of shipping a month. The British shared his view to put fire at 600,000 tons, but submarines were slow and the distances were enormous. Many convoys were able to slip past. Hitler had also given less priority to building U-boats than Admiral Dixon would have liked. By the end of 1940, only 22 were operational. On the other hand, U-boat commanders had developed lethal new tactics, operating through in wolf packs. And the export of submarine anchors such as Otto Kutschmier and Gunther Thun, who had sunk the Royal Oak, proved intro to many other U-boat commanders. The British were forced to find methods of fighting back, using still rotary sonar, detecting shipment destroyers, convoys, dropped depth charges on suspected U-boats. By March 1941, Pearn had been sunk and running battles with the same convoy, and the first U-boat commander to sink 300,000 tons of shipping, according to his radio operator, to signal Dixon. He had sunk another 50,000 tons. The man who had sunk the Athena, Julius Lepp, also captured by the British together, were Scratcher code, allowed them to crack the German naval codes. He had also arrived in the form of the lead passed in America. U.S. President Franklin Roosevelt promised the British 50 electrical American destroyers in return for strategic British bases and another trade concessions. When the ships were delivered in September 1940, only 9 were fit for immediate service, but it was an powerful isolationist lobby who wanted to keep America out of the war could be even more helpful to the British. American troops marched into Iceland to relieve the British forces there, and soon American destroyers were themselves being attacked by U-boats. In March. In April, a naval warfare would found Hitler 1941 whenever British ships until the hour for desertion arrives. As it was, April 1941 saw nearly 179,000 tons of shipping go to the bottom of the Atlantic. It was possible that the moment when Britain came closest to losing the war. There was also the threat of German surface raids, pocket battleships, battlecruisers, and corvettes, merchant ships through the main fleet was carefully considered by Hitler, afraid of the propaganda, risked major losses in bringing. In January 1941, the German biscuit submarine slipped into the Atlantic via Denmark, straight over the Atlantic cruise, attacking convoys and avoiding battle themselves, slipping into the French port of Brest. Encouraged by success in May 1941, the German naval commander Erich Rochman, using the powerful new pocket battleship Bismarck, under the command of Gunther Ludwig, who had mastered the Sudmet and Gunu raids, the Bismarck stopped from its anchor in a Norwegian ford, and by the threat to tripling the British home fleet were after the raid in short wind. The three of the crew survived, but on 28th of May, as it headed for Brest, the Bismarck was finally trapped and sunk. Hundreds of German sailors were drowned when a U-boat scare forced rescuing British ships away from the scene. The Bismarck put up a gallant fight. Against impossible odds, wrote the British Admiral Sir John Turvey in his report, it is unfortunate that, for political reasons, the fact cannot be made public. Hitler was said to be monically beyond words out over the sinking, and he had another reason for concern. The day before the Bismarck went down, the first fully escorted British convoy left Newfoundland, and seeing that the happy time for U-boat commanders was about to end. Otherwise by air, nor by sea, the Nazis, able to bring British to their knees, and if invasion of the island had been successful, there has been reason to think Nazis would have installed the kind of regime they had become the norm in occupied Europe. Liberal intellectuals would have been arrested. A list of 2,820 had already been drawn up. Jews would have been transported in slavery instead. There would have been both coldness and resistance. The British were fortunate not to have to undergo that long night of occupation in which Western neighbor, and survival was often made as a greater shame. Well, at the end of the chapter, if you see a veteran, walk up to them and say thank you. And give them a coffee if they're having a bad day, and yeah, just say thank you. Thank you to the veterans for making this so I can do my videos and making me free. Thank you. This concludes day 5 of 11 Days of Remembrance.